Welcome to the Women Inspire Aspire podcast. In this episode, I talked to Anusha Rao about Sanskrit. Hi, Anusha. Thank you so much for accepting my invite to appear in the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Venkat. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm all fine. I'm excited to get started.
It's quite fascinating to have somebody from the other side of the globe. It's 10 p.m. What's the time there?
It's noon in Toronto.
Wonderful. How is the weather there?
Oh, we're having a heat wave, so it's pretty unbearable actually. Yeah, but it's a change from the usual cold weather in Canada. So
Okay, so the climate change is affecting everybody, I guess.
yes.
Okay, let's get started. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. So I'm Anusha Rao. I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Department for the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto. So I work on the history of Vedanta, particularly in the early modern period, which is around the 15th to 17th centuries in South India. And I look at how Vedanta doctrines of several important schools of Vedanta, Advaita and Dvaita, particularly developed during this period. So that's about my PhD work. Other than that, I'm a co-author of the book How to Love in Sanskrit that came out with HarperCollins in February this year. So that's a little bit about me. Happy to say more about anything you're interested in.
Well, that's a great topic to start with, Advaita and Dvaita, because I grew up in a society which had both Shaivites and Vaishnavites.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be interesting to discuss about the topic, to get started with the topic. So the practices are different in both of these sects, although the ultimate goal is the same. Could you elaborate a bit about what you have studied on Advaita and Dvaita, and let us know a bit about the background of those things?
Of course, yes. So it's very interesting that you began with the ultimate goal is the same. So perhaps we could start there because one of the most common misconceptions about debates in pre-modern India between various religious groups, such as adherents of Dvaita Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta, is that ultimately they're all saying the same thing. That's not strictly true at all because while the ultimate goal of all these sub schools of Vedanta would be to realize Brahman and to gain moksha or liberation, what they define as Brahman or what they define as moksha and liberation are very different in each school. So ultimately, they're not really saying the same thing at all. Um, but what we do have is a very strong spirit of philosophical inquiry that we see within both of these disciplines. And you have scholars debating back and forth about the correct meanings of various Upanishadic texts. And the argument goes on and on, continued by adherents of both schools over centuries. And it continues to this day. So one of the interesting things most people don't know about is this lively kind of spirit of inquiry that is fostered by these thinkers. And that actually their philosophical standpoints are very different. The conclusions they come to are very different. They're not the same at all. It's not just a matter of one saying um, God is called Shiva and the other saying God is called Vishnu, for example. They differ on the nature of reality, they differ on what our relationship with Brahman is, and so on.
Yeah, I have heard about a relationship with Brahman being different in
Mhm.
both of these schools, but I
Mhm.
want to know how the reality is different. What is the ultimate reality in both of these sects?
Right. So, according to Advaita Vedanta, there is a tripartite system of reality where there are three kinds of realities. All of these are realities, but at different levels. So, there are three different levels. One would be the Pratibhasika level of reality. So, the most famous example that I'm sure you've heard of is that of the rope and snake. If you're walking about in the dark, and your leg just brushes against something and it looks long and kind of coiled, it's possible you would think of it as a snake. But then when you shine a torch on it, for instance, you might see that it was actually a rope. So this illusion, the snake rope illusion, is a very common trope used in these Indian philosophical texts. And according to the Advaitins, you experienced fear as a result of thinking there was a snake. So what is the ontological status? What is the reality of that snake? That is what they call pratibhasika reality. The snake existed at one point, but then at a later point you realized it was not there. And so that snake, which is a mental construct of yours, that is a pratibhasika reality. And then they posit a second level of reality, which is the vyavaharika reality, which is to say, when that is the status of this world that we currently live in, which we experience. So, for instance, I see some water, I think of it as water, and when I drink it, it quenches my thirst. And so it's actually fulfilling the functions we expect it to function. We can make cause-effect relationships about things in the world. Generally, it works. But according to the Advaitins, when we reach a certain point, when we realize the truth about the world, when we understand what the Upanishads say, at that point, just like once we shone a torch and saw that the snake was no longer there, similarly, we'll be able to see that the whole world does not exist at the highest ultimate level of reality. And so that's the second level. The reality of the world is Vyavaharika reality. And then they have the third and ultimate reality, which is the Paramarthika. There is nothing beyond it. And at this level of reality, there is only one thing, Brahman. There is nothing beyond it. So this is the Advaitin's conception of reality. Whereas according to Dvaita, the world we inhabit is a very real one. There are no multiple levels of reality. According to the Dvaitins, the snake that we thought existed but did not is actually not real at all. It's so that is not a category of reality. According to them, it is never the case that we realize Brahman and then we realize that the world did not really exist. So there is only one kind of reality. And the snake and other such illusory objects are simply not real in Dvaita. So they have a fundamental disagreement, the two schools, on what it means to be real.
Interesting. There is a lot to decipher here, and there is a lot to study here. But thanks for those inputs. Now, coming to the Sanskrit part of it, I have a question to start with.
Sure.
So this is about Hara and Hari. So now, according to my knowledge, there's this re sound that ends. I think it signifies something like a feminine, if I'm not wrong, because we say Ishwar and then we say Ishwari, and so similarly, I have seen Hara and Hari. Is there any relationship between Hari and Ishwari in terms of the perception or the understanding, because both of them end with E, and so according to Sanskrit, I doubt whether there is any relationship between these two. Do you have any
That's an
inputs?
interesting question, but actually, when you think about it, there are so many words that are masculine and still end with E. So it's just a matter of the ending in Sanskrit grammar. So we have words like Kavi, which is poet, Ravi, which is the sun, all of which are masculine and short E ending. In fact, we have some masculine long E endings as well in Sanskrit. By which I mean, so if there is a certain word that ends with an N, for instance, you can see an elongated ending at the end of a masculine word. So simply put, basically masculine words can end in E too when we're using them in the nominative case. So there's no particular link between say a word like Ishwari and Hari.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So let's go
Sure.
ahead and talk about your Sanskrit work, and let's talk about what you are doing. And I would specifically want to talk about the impact of Sanskrit on human well-being. So could you please go ahead?
Sure. So my work, as I said, revolves around the history of Vedanta. And I particularly study discussions and polemics between the Advaita and Dvaita schools. I also study how the Vedanta school that a certain thinker belongs to impacts or intersects with their poetic writings. So there are many intellectuals in, say, between the 15th and 17th centuries, which I work on, who write poetry a certain way because of their philosophical beliefs. Or sometimes despite them, by which I mean there might be a thinker like Ghanashyama, he is in the 18th century, who is actually a Smarta Shaiva. He's an adherent of Advaita strictly, but then he writes a poem, an allegorical play in praise of a Madhva monk who was his contemporary. So I basically study how their religious beliefs align with their poetic writings. What's the philosophy behind their poetry? That's what I work on. But I think you had a slightly different question later about Sanskrit.
Yeah, I have heard that words and sounds have an impact on our systems, human systems. And so I
Mhm.
have also heard that Sanskrit words have a profound impact on our systems, and that's why they say that we have to speak Sanskrit so that it has a direct impact on how we function and our well-being. So
Mhm.
I was wondering if you have any inputs on that, or have you read anything
Sure.
about
So
Sanskrit?
this is a claim that we hear repeatedly. And it's one of the things that I actually tend to push back against because I mean, I'm no authority on the effects of sound on the human body, and there might be something to that. But I feel nevertheless that so no one would be asking the same question about Kannada, which happens to be my native language, or about English. What's the effect of speaking English on, say, our body or our well-being? And I think the main reason that we tend to do this to Sanskrit is that we want to appreciate it, which is a very good impulse because it's such an important part of our culture and it's such a beautiful language. It's the most beautiful language that I know, which is one of the reasons I learned it in the first place. But I feel like we shouldn't put undue pressure on a literature or a language to do something more than what its natural functions are. So,
Mhm.
language has such a gorgeous treasure of literature there to read of so many different kinds. So, why do we need it to impact the human body in some way for it to be important at all? Of course, Sanskrit is deeply linked with so many different religious and spiritual practices. So, if we say those practices give someone some kind of comfort or result, that is great. But I think when it comes to the language itself, uh, we should try to put in more of an effort to appreciate a language as a language rather than trying to imbue it with various different superpowers, such as impacting the body or the mind. We do have systems such as yoga that are written in Sanskrit, the treatises of yoga are written in Sanskrit, for instance. So, if one were to say that yoga has a good physical impact or a mental impact on one's well being, that would be a great thing to say. But I don't know if we can generalize that to Sanskrit itself. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. And
Mhm.
that reminds me of another aspect of temples. Whenever somebody goes to a temple, they appreciate the architecture, and their
Mhm.
curiosity just stops with the architecture. They marvel the architecture. They say that, oh, this temple looks great. Look at these
Mhm.
carvings. How big are
Mhm.
these temples? How they have built such a big temple in the olden days and all that.
Mhm.
But there is a science behind the temples, is what I hear, in terms of how the architecture is designed and how that is enhancing the divinity of the temple,
Mhm.
of the deity that is present in the temple. So,
Mhm.
have you, in your studies, come across anything like how the architecture of the temple would enhance it in terms of both the Advaita temples and the Dvaita temples?
Yeah, so I work mainly on the Dvaita system. So I can tell you that there's a text called the Tantra Sara Sangraha, which
Uh-huh.
is used specifically to administer all religious structures. And so you get details in this text about exactly how an idol should be made. So, what should be the length of various components of the idol? What should be the length of the arms? What should be the length of the legs, the head, and so on? Um, and this is a really beautiful system. And we have so many such texts within the Indian tradition. This one particularly happens to be the one that Dvaita Vedantins follow in their administration of temples or in their creation of idols, in their system of worship, and so on. And I do think this adds a beautiful diversity as well as beauty to the traditions that we follow, that there is a certain rigor involved in them. You can't just do anything and get away with it. So it dictates everything from what is the order in which you perform a puja, what do you do first, what do you do next, to which direction, which part of the temple should face, and so on. So it's a whole different set of things to learn over which I can't say I have expertise, but it certainly adds great beauty to each tradition that we encounter in India.
Wonderful. So when you talk about the ideals having specific measurements and specific dimensions and things like that, have you ever come across inputs about why they have four hands, why there is specific things like Sudarshana Chakra, and which is part of the ideal, and what functions they perform in
Yes,
enhancing the
yes.
divinity?
So, particularly when it comes to idols, these are mainly structured. I'm specifically talking about the beliefs of the Madhvas or the Dvaita Vedantins, who say that we must meditate on certain forms of the Lord for certain results. So, to put it very simply, if I want, if I have some major problem or obstacle in my life that I'm trying to get rid of, then they would advocate praying to, say, the Narasimha form of Vishnu. Whereas if I want, so traditionally, people who want children usually pray to, say, Santana Gopala or some form of Krishna, who is worshipped as a baby. So in this way, the Madhvas maintain that Narasimha and Krishna are absolutely one and the same because they're both Vishnu. Nevertheless, we pray to certain forms of God which have certain features if we want some part of those features. So in this way, the various vigrahas of God too are chosen carefully based on one's internal nature and what one wants. Um, and yeah, that is generally how it works. So there are so many different forms of Vishnu. In fact, Vishnu is Chaturbhuja. He has four arms and in many of his forms. And depending on which hand carries the chakra, which hand carries the gada, which hand carries the padma, and so on, there's a rotation of those, and each of those forms has a different name. So meditating on, reflecting on these different forms of God are believed to give different kinds of results. And so we see such a wealth of different iconography of various gods. And this is just one example of Vishnu and his four arms and what is in each of those arms. But you just think of the variety of gods that we have all across India and the different beliefs of their devotees. So we have a whole wealth of iconography at our disposal, like I said.
Absolutely. I had been to Sri Rangam temple recently, and I found so many varieties of deities inside the temple,
Yeah.
each depicting a different form of Vishnu. It is amazing. And so it's
Absolutely. Yeah. Sri Rangam is a place I wanted to visit for really long. I was in Puri last year, and
okay.
I visited the Konark Sun Temple too, which is simply beautiful. So it's always a matter of great amazement and interest for me to try to go to different places in India with very different temple architectures and to appreciate the sculptures, the iconography there, the different deities.
Interesting. Let's talk about your own philosophical thoughts apart from whatever the philosophy you are derived from your study. So, what is your concept of God or the reality, in your own opinion?
Yeah, that's a very major question. I feel like my general approach to philosophy is to focus on the little details and to think very clearly. I like I said, I start from bottoms up and work my way very slowly through little questions and try to understand them clearly rather than
That's a
try
scientific way of doing
some
it. Yeah.
kind of uh, grand philosophy of life. So I would not really be able to comment on questions as big as the nature of God or the nature of ultimate reality. I would
But
say that itself is my philosophy to not
with your
decide.
questioning, you might have achieved some level of clarity. You might probably look at that.
Let's just say I believe one should have a greater focus on what one wants to accomplish here and now in life.
That's pretty interesting. So it all boils down to what we want ultimately.
Yes.
Is okay, great. Let's talk about your poetry now. So, have you written poems, and do you have a book or something?
Yes. So my partner and I translated Sanskrit love poetry. So we looked at sources spanning over 3,000 years in the tradition, and we translated the best of the love poetry we got from Sanskrit into English. And our book, How to Love in Sanskrit, was just released by HarperCollins India in February this year. So
Wonderful.
far we've heard from readers who really enjoyed it. I hope you get to read it as well.
Yeah, I would like to get to it at some point of time. And I ask this question to everybody who appears in my podcast. What are
Mhm.
the societal issues that you see around you, and what bothers you, and how would you address them, or how would you fix them?
Sure. So I think, again, like I just told you, I'm against quick fixes, and I think it's really difficult to find solutions to major systemic issues. So maybe I should just speak about a couple of issues in my own field, starting with the one I told you, that there is all this pressure on Sanskrit to be something that it's not. So for instance, we keep coming across forwards that say Sanskrit is the best language for computer programming, or NASA has started a department to study Sanskrit, um, and all these kinds of tall claims. So one of my issues is that we don't need. So what this does, basically, to put it in another way, is that we are claiming that what we are interested in today in today's world has to be the most important, and everything else that came before it has to somehow subscribe to this kind of modern ideology to be important. So because today we value scientific development, we think that everything uh, has to be contributing to scientific development in some way to be of use, including ancient literatures like the one in Sanskrit. And I
Hmm.
think I would like to fight back against this claim because it's simply not true. Um, just a couple of 100 years ago, perhaps people had different kinds of beliefs. And then would we have expected Sanskrit or some other ancient language to just have a wealth of literature in those?
I guess
So why do we need Sanskrit literature to have a wealth of information on flying aeroplanes or some kind of exotic creature or evolution or something else to be valuable in and of its own? So I think what would help this is for us to think very carefully about the claims we make about what is important to us and what is not, and to recognize that just the cultural value, the historical value, or the literary beauty of these texts is sufficient to be able to make them worth reading and enjoying in and of themselves, instead of trying to cast them into this kind of scientific frame that we are so fond of these days. So I would say that's one. The other is historical thinking. Um, I think there is too much of an emphasis within India on engineering and studying medicine, which is great. We do need doctors and engineers, but I think it would be great if we could equip the next generation of those coming up to think carefully about every issue. And this would serve them outside of their own narrow fields of work, but also within them. So, and I don't just mean having very broad ideals, but being able to think very specifically about things, being able to reason in the abstract, being able to think about how to distinguish between fake news and real news, for instance. So, what makes something authentic? I feel like this kind of skill set to reason, or the basics of research, should really be taught um, to a much broader audience, maybe even in schools to start with, which would really help prevent the spread of misinformation, which would help us think historically, which would help stop so many conflicts that we see, whether the social or religious, that happen over and over again in our country. So that's something I'm interested in.
Great. But I think it's a tall call because right now the schools and colleges are not even given thinking time. We are
Mhm.
always like run, run, run.
Yes.
Finish this course and finish the next one and keep running, and then the 4 years just fly away, and you
Yes.
won't have anything to think about. You just mug up the syllabus and vomit in the exam, and you get a degree and you move on. So that's what is
That's
happening.
right. Yeah.
And I think this system itself has to change. But the problem with changing the system is that the colleges and institutions are not ready to do that, um, because they have their pressure from the universities, which say that you have to you get certain points for
Mhm.
each of these things, and if you don't do that you don't get points, and ultimately the college gets affected. So it's a chain of things that are happening, which needs to be completely
Absolutely.
changed. In many cases it's the system is getting regressive rather than being progressive. So we need to look at these things in a very deep fashion. But I see a lot of improvements coming in India in terms of people's students thinking
Mhm.
about their careers. And I see a lot of psychology students, and psychology
Mhm.
has branched out into industrial psychology, clinical psychology, counseling, and so on. And a lot of
Mhm.
students are doing
Mhm.
different kinds of this career paths, which is great. And there are content developers, and uh, there are social kind of careers that are coming up, which is
Mhm.
good. Uh, there is a bright future, and I have a very good what do you call hope on the youth and
Yes.
the younger generation in India. Okay, so enough of my stuff. So tell
No.
us about your hobbies and interests. So what do you do apart from, of course, Sanskrit poetry and all that? What do you do?
Uh,
Activities?
oh well, I like to cook occasionally.
What do you cook?
Try new stuff. So I basically enjoy making South Indian meals best, but I do branch out and try out different cuisines.
Okay.
Apart from that, I like to work on manuscripts, which is more Sanskrit. So currently, my partner and I are working on a Subhashita anthology of verses by one of the oldest anthologies in Sanskrit by a poet called Bhartra Saraswata, who is basically lost to us today. And the
Hmm.
text is absolutely incredible. He does new kinds of alankaras and beautiful poetry in Sanskrit of a kind that we have not seen before. So we're working on editing and restoring the manuscript and translating it.
Wow.
So yeah. So we had one book come out in February on how to love, and now we're working on a second volume, how to pray in Sanskrit. So a lot of my other hobbies, as you can imagine, revolve around more Sanskrit, either philosophical or literary.
Okay. So what does your name Anusha mean?
Oh, that's a complicated one, but there is no real, there is not really a meaning that we could discover in Sanskrit. So that's something you'd have to ask my parents rather than me, who named me for a character in a book that they really liked.
There
By
is
end of
a
yeah,
nakshatra called Anusham in
that's right. Yeah, that seems to be a Tamil one rather than the Sanskrit name of it. So
oh really? Okay.
perhaps that's the origin. Yeah.
And they actually associate some characteristics to Anusham being straightforward and, very curt in their behavior and things like that.
I see. Well, you'll have to tell me if I'm Anvarthanama then.
No, 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 I'm just saying what I've heard. It's not about
Yeah.
you. So, so thanks so much for spending time with us today. And
All
there
right. It
is,
was great chatting, Venkat.
it was wealth of information, and I'm pretty sure that people who are hearing this will be motivated to study more about the sects of Hinduism that you talked about, um,
Mhm.
the deities, the idols, the temples, and things like that, and also about Sanskrit and also poetry. You mentioned also about manuscripts which are dying and you want to revive some of them. So things that are very interesting to think about by the young generation. So thank you so much for all those information, and it was a pleasure talking to you today. And I
Thank
wish
you
you
so
all the
much.
best. I wish you all the best for your work and your future.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
That was a great podcast with Anusha Rao. Please subscribe to this channel and follow it for more awesome podcasts. Opinions expressed by the guests in this podcast are their own. The host or the sponsors of the podcast do not condone the opinions expressed by the guests or the actions arising out of those opinions. Any decisions or actions that the listeners might take as a result of listening to this podcast must be based on their own judgment and will be at their own risk. The podcast host or their sponsors will not be held responsible for the consequences of any actions and or decisions taken as a result of any content in this podcast.